Close your eyes and imagine Beverly Hills on a Sunday night in late August 1989. The air is thick with the scent of jasmine and extreme wealth. At 722 North Elm Drive, a multi-million-dollar Mediterranean-style villa is submerged in absolute silence. Inside, Jose and Kitty Menendez are relaxing on a luxury sofa, watching the James Bond film, The Living Daylights. They have no idea that these are the final moments of their lives. In the world of strange frequency, we call this the frequency of false peace. In just a few seconds, this stillness will be torn apart by 15 blasts from a 12-gauge Mossberg shotgun. These shots did not just end 2 lives. They initiated one of the most controversial legal tragedies in United States history. Gunfire erupted in the heart of paradise, and it turns out the angel 11:47 p.m. The 911 dispatch center receives a call. The first sound you hear isn't a word, but a soul-shattering scream. "Someone killed my parents!" Lyle Menendez shrieks, his voice cracking in sheer terror. In the background, we can hear the muffled sobbing of Erik, the 18-year-old younger brother.
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Were they shot?
Hey, man,
Were they shot?
yes.
Listen closely to the frequency of those cries. Does it seem too perfect? Too theatrical? Or is it truly the sound of children who have just witnessed the most horrific scene on Earth? Police arrive within minutes. They find the 2 brothers kneeling on the sidewalk, heads in hands, completely broken. But there is a detail that the first officers on the scene never forgot. Amidst the wailing, Lyle's eyes would occasionally turn unnervingly cold as he stared at the mansion. It was as if he were checking to see if his performance was hitting the right notes. As detectives step through the heavy oak doors into the living room, they are stunned. The scene doesn't look like a burglary. It looks like a military massacre. Jose Menendez was shot in the back of the head at point-blank range, an execution-style killing. Kitty Menendez, in a desperate attempt to crawl away, was shot through her legs and then her face. Blood splattered across expensive paintings, onto marble statues, and even the TV remote still lying there. The killers didn't just want them dead, they wanted to erase them. Police begin searching for shell casings, for signs of a break-in, but they find nothing. No broken windows, no stolen jewelry. Only 2 unrecognizable corpses and the pungent smell of gunpowder lingering in the luxurious Beverly Hills air. The frequency of crime was whispering a different truth. The culprits did not come from the outside. While the bodies of Jose and Kitty are taken away under white sheets, Lyle and Erik continue to play the roles of traumatized, grieving sons. But observe how they move. Lyle, the eldest, seems to be orchestrating everything. He comforts Erik but answers the police with remarkable clarity about their schedule. Seeing the movie Batman that night, a perfect alibi. At that moment, the entire country felt for them, 2 young orphans who inherited a fortune but lost all love. But strange frequency wants you to notice one thing. At the scene, police found shotgun shells discarded carelessly. Was it the sloppiness of an amateur or the arrogance of those who believed they stood above the law? Chapter 1 closes with the image of the Menendez mansion shrouded in darkness, hiding horrific secrets that will soon be exposed through the frantic shopping receipts of the next chapter. To understand why Lyle and Erik picked up those guns that night, we must understand the man they called father, Jose Menendez. Jose was the personification of spectacular success. A Cuban immigrant who arrived with nothing, he climbed to the pinnacle of the entertainment industry at RCA and Live Entertainment. He was a true shark, signing legendary bands and moving millions of dollars with a single nod. But inside the Beverly Hills mansion, Jose didn't run a family. He operated an autocracy. Everything had to be perfect, from the way Lyle tied his tie to Erik's tennis serve. In Jose's world, failure wasn't just a wrong choice. It was a crime against the Menendez bloodline. The frequency of success in this house always came with a suffocating pressure, where love was measured by scores on a card and absolute submissiveness. Jose had a parenting method he called character building, but Lyle and Erik called it psychological torture. If one of the brothers lost a tennis match, they would be forced to stand in the sun for hours while their father insulted them. Jose would use the most vitriolic words to degrade them, making them feel like cowards in their own eyes. There is a story that Jose once forced Lyle to remove his hairpiece in front of the whole family just to humiliate him, to remind Lyle, "I own you, even your deepest secrets." This wasn't ordinary strictness. This was a frequency of personality destruction. Jose wanted to create perfect clones of himself, but he didn't realize he was creating time bombs, accumulating hatred over years beneath a glamorous facade. And then we have Kitty, a former beauty queen, a wife who always appeared radiant beside her husband. But behind that layer of powder and lipstick was a shattered soul. Kitty knew everything Jose did to the boys. She knew about the beatings, the control, and perhaps things even worse. But Kitty chose silence. She chose to protect the image of the perfect family over her own flesh and blood. A mother's silence can sometimes be more cruel than a father's abuse. In the frequency of strange frequency, Kitty was not an innocent victim. She was a conspirator of silence. She left Lyle and Erik to drown in Jose's shadow, as long as the Menendez name remained respected in Beverly Hills. This betrayal was the deepest cut into the hearts of the two brothers. By mid-1989, the frequency of endurance had reached its limit. Jose threatened to remove the brothers from his will, stripping them of everything they had. For Lyle and Erik, it wasn't just about losing money. It was about losing the only chain holding them to this life. They felt death approaching, either the death of their dignity or actual death at Jose's hands. A private meeting took place between the brothers, not to discuss running away, but to discuss ending the source of the pain. They began searching for shotguns using fake IDs. They began calculating the timing. Dinner on August 20th was not a spontaneous outburst. It was a bloody coup to overthrow a tyrant king. And the price of that freedom, as we know, was a pool of blood in the living room. Just days after the bodies of Jose and Kitty were lowered into the ground, a new frequency began to resonate in Beverly Hills. Not the sound of mourning, but the sound of endless credit card swipes. While America was still reeling from the massacre, Lyle and Erik embarked on a spending spree unlike anything in criminal history. Lyle walked into a Rolex store and instantly purchased a $15,000 watch. Erik hired a full-time private tennis coach with a weekly salary in the thousands. They bought brand new Porsche Carreras, the most expensive Armani suits, and began booking tables at Los Angeles' most elite restaurants. Within the first 7 months, they had burned through $700,000 of their inheritance. To the public, this wasn't a manifestation of grief. It was a celebration on top of their parents' corpses. The frequency of this spending was so powerful that it drowned out every later plea for mercy regarding the abuse. Why did they do it? Were they just greedy? If we look through the lens of strange frequency, we see a more complex truth. After 20 years of being controlled down to every breath, Jose's departure created a sudden power vacuum. Lyle and Erik were like prisoners who had just escaped a dungeon and had no idea what to do with sudden freedom except throw money at it. They bought Rolexes because that was what Jose used to control them. Now they own them as spoils of war. Every expensive item was a shield to hide their visceral fear that the police were closing in. They partied like there was no tomorrow because deep down, they knew their tomorrow might be prison bars. This wasn't enjoyment. It was a frequency of slow suicide through materialism. They were trying to buy back their lost childhood with blood-soaked dollar bills. While the brothers were immersed in their revelry, detectives from the Beverly Hills Police Department, Lazoller and Tom Linhan, were silently observing. They saw this frequency of spending and realized something was deeply wrong. Truly grieving children do not go Porsche shopping immediately after a funeral. Police began retracing gun store records in San Diego and found a lead. A record of 2 Mossberg shotgun purchases by someone named Donovan Goodrow. But Donovan had a perfect alibi, and he was Lyle's friend. At this moment, the frequency of suspicion shifted into the frequency of the hunt. The detectives knew they were facing off against wealth and power. They needed direct evidence, a confession from the killer's own mouths, and they didn't have to wait long because arrogance often goes hand in hand with carelessness. By early 1990, the party began to fade. Money could not fill the void of the nightmares that came every night. Erik, the more sensitive younger brother, began to crumble. He couldn't sleep. He saw the ghost of his mother in the dark corners of the mansion. While Lyle tried to maintain a tough exterior, Erik was standing on the edge of a nervous breakdown. The frequency of panic began to overwhelm the frequency of arrogance. And in a moment of weakness, Erik sought out the only person he thought could help him, psychologist Jerome Ociel. A decision that would completely collapse the empire the brothers had tried to build on blood and tears. Chapter 3 ends as Erik enters the clinic, carrying the world's heaviest secret, prepared to release a frequency of truth that he can never take back. October 1989, 2 months after the massacre. While the outside world was still speculating about mafia hits or Jose's business rivals, a frequency of truth was about to be broadcast inside Suite 105 in Beverly Hills. Jose Menendez, at the time just a broken 18-year-old boy, walked into the office of psychologist Dr. Jerome Ociel. He didn't come to treat ordinary anxiety. He came because his soul was on fire. Dr. Ociel, a man of professional standing but with his own dark corners, realized immediately this was no ordinary consultation. Erik sat down, his hands trembling, and began to speak of nightmares. But Erik's nightmares didn't happen in his sleep. They resided in what he had done on the night of August 20th. As Erik uttered those first few words, the air in the clinic seemed to freeze. The biggest secret in Beverly Hills had just been laid on the table. "We did it. We killed our parents." Those words dropped to the floor like heavy lead pellets. Erik detailed how they entered the house, how they loaded the guns, and how they looked into Kitty's eyes before pulling the trigger. Dr. Ociel, instead of calling the police immediately, made a strange decision. He summoned Lyle. When Lyle walked in, the frequency in the room shifted from remorse to threat. Lyle didn't cry. He was furious. He threatened to kill Ociel if he breathed a word. But Ociel quickly realized this was a golden opportunity to seize power and money over the Menendez brothers. A devil's triangle was formed, 2 killers and a calculating psychologist. This conversation was recorded on a microcassette tape, the very object that would later become the prosecutor's ultimate weapon to send the brothers to prison. But in every perfect script, there is an unexpected variable. That variable's name was Judalon Smith, Dr. Ociel's mistress. Judalon wasn't a patient. She was the one who pressed her ear to the clinic door and heard everything. She heard Erik's sobs, Lyle's threats, and Ociel's fear. When the relationship between Judalon and Ociel crumbled, she decided to deliver a painful counterstrike. Judalon walked into the police station and dropped a bombshell. "I know who killed the Menendezes, and my doctor has the recordings." The frequency of truth was no longer locked inside the clinic. It had spread to the entire world. The brothers' mask wasn't ripped off by genius detectives, but by the revenge of a woman scorned. March 1990. The party was officially over. Lyle was arrested right outside the mansion as he prepared to leave in his luxury car. Erik, currently in Israel for a tennis tournament, received the call and knew it was over. He flew back to Los Angeles, not to flee, but to face his destiny. When the 2 brothers stood in the dock for the first time, camera flashes exploded incessantly. All of America saw the princes of Beverly Hills in orange prison jumpsuits. The frequency of luxury had been completely replaced by the frequency of judgment. But what no one anticipated was that the upcoming trial would not just be about murder. It would open a door leading straight into the hell on earth the brothers had endured since the age of 6. Chapter 4 closes, leaving the question: were they greedy monsters or victims pushed to the brink? 1993. The Los Angeles County Superior Court transformed into a massive theater. For the first time in history, a murder trial was broadcast live on court TV, bringing every expression and every tear of Lyle and Erik directly into the living rooms of every American family. The world held its breath as they watched the princes of Beverly Hills, now looking small and out of place in soft pastel knit sweaters, a calculated wardrobe choice designed to soften the image of shotgun-wielding assassins. The prosecution brought ironclad evidence, Ociel's confession tapes and a list of luxury purchases. They tuned into a frequency of greed, convincing the jury that this was simply a case of killing parents to inherit a $14 million fortune. But they did not expect that, on the other side of the battle lines, one woman was preparing to flip that frequency entirely. Leslie Abramson. Remember that name? A short woman, but one who carried the power of a hurricane. She didn't choose to deny that they pulled the trigger. She chose a more shocking tactic: self-defense in a state of mortal fear. Leslie began to broadcast an entirely different frequency, the frequency of buried pain. She declared that the brothers didn't kill for money. They killed because they had no other way to survive. She transformed the trial from a judgment of Lyle and Erik's crimes into a judgment of Jose and Kitty's brutality. Leslie turned the courtroom into a public therapy session where the filthiest secrets of the Beverly Hills elite were exposed. For the first time, the phrase abused child syndrome was used as a shield for a first-degree murder case. When Erik stepped up to the witness stand, the vibrations of the entire room seemed to fall silent. For days, this young man had been recounting horrific details of what had happened. Erik described how household objects became tools of humiliation, and how his mother, Kitty, knew but chose to look the other way. The tears shed on the witness stand no longer looked like an act. They carried the weight of decades of silence. The American public was deeply divided. Half believed they were the best actors in Hollywood. The other half began to see broken children crying for help. The initial frequency of hatred was slowly replaced by shock. Was death a fair price for what they had endured? Or is a crime still a crime, regardless of the reason? The result of the first trial was a shockwave. The jury could not reach a verdict. They were split between murder and manslaughter. Lyle and Erik were not convicted, but they were not free. Justice was stuck in a hung frequency. America was stunned. How could two men who admitted to blowing their parents' faces off escape conviction? The prosecution was livid. They swore that in the second trial, they would completely silence the abuse frequency to focus on the blood frequency. But before stepping into that fight, we need to go deep into the core of the pain. What happened during those dark, lightless nights at the Menendez mansion? Chapter 5 closes in a state of suspension as the line between killer and victim becomes more blurred than ever. In the world of the wealthy, closed doors often conceal the most horrific frequencies. This chapter is not for the faint of heart. According to the testimony of Erik and Lyle, their hell did not begin on the night of the shooting. It began when they were just 6 years old. Imagine a child in a magnificent mansion where every toy is expensive, yet every time night falls, the sound of a father's footsteps in the hallway carries the sound of a death sentence. Jose Menendez was not just a strict father, he was a predator in his own home. Erik recounted that Jose would often call him into a private room, lock the door, and commit acts that no child should ever know. This frequency of abuse repeated like a cruel algorithm, turning love into humiliation and protection into possession. To Jose, his children were not human beings. They were property to satisfy his absolute control, both physically and mentally. Lyle Menendez, the eldest son, had endured this for much longer. He spoke of Jose using ordinary objects, a leather belt, a brush, or even medical instruments, to perform bizarre body inspections. Jose called it a way to help his sons grow and be strong, but in reality, it was a way to break their will. Every time Lyle tried to resist, Jose used the power of money and intimidation to crush him. The frequency of pain here was not just physical agony, it was the total destruction of the concept of the self. Lyle described feeling like a broken toy, a decoration in Jose's display case. This abuse took place right under the nose of Beverly Hills high society. But in the frequency of wealth, the screams of children are often drowned out by the clinking of wine glasses and the sound of expensive symphonies. Why didn't they run away? This is the question the prosecution used to attack them. But look at the frequency of systematic abuse. When you are abused before you can even read, the abuser becomes God in your eyes. Jose taught them that the outside world was dangerous and only he was their protector. He bought them Porsches and gave them limitless spending money to buy a distorted sense of loyalty and silence. It was a domestic form of Stockholm Syndrome. Erik said he felt guilty every time Jose bought him a gift, because he knew what the price would be that night. This is the most heartless subversion of reality, turning sexual predatory behavior into a privilege of the rich. The brothers lived in a golden cage where the food was abalone, but the air was poison. By the summer of 1989, Lyle discovered that Jose had begun to target Erik more intensely. When Lyle confronted his father to demand he stop, Jose was unrepentant. He only laughed and threatened to kill them both if the secret ever got out. This was the moment the frequency of fear transformed into the frequency of doom. They realized that in Jose's kingdom, no one was coming to save them. No police, no mother, no neighbors. Only them and 2 shotgun barrels to end the cycle of hell. Chapter 6 closes with Erik's most painful testimony. I didn't kill my father for money. I killed him because I wanted to sleep one night without locking the door. A confession that shook the conscience of many. But was it enough to wash the blood from their hands? We will explore the terrifying silence of their mother in the next chapter. In every family torn by abuse, there is an agonizing question. Where was the mother? Kitty Menendez, a woman who was once a beauty queen, now emerges in the case files as a ghost of passivity. She wasn't ignorant of what was happening. Lyle and Erik testified that she witnessed the bruises, heard the screams, and sometimes even helped Jose clean up the aftermath of his rages. In the world of strange frequency, we call Kitty the frequency of silent complicity. She chose to sacrifice her children to protect the stability of the Menendez kingdom. To Kitty, losing her status as a Beverly Hills socialite was more terrifying than the destruction of her sons. She didn't choose the light. She chose Jose's darkness because it was the only place she felt she still had value. This betrayal carries a frequency more painful than the abuse itself, for it came from the person who was supposed to be the children's final shield. But let's look deeper into Kitty. She too was a victim of Jose's toxic control. Jose cheated on her openly, belittled her in front of friends, and turned her into nothing more than a decorative object. To endure, Kitty turned to alcohol and sedatives. She lived in a suspended state, a frequency of desensitization. Erik recalled a chilling detail. Kitty once ripped off Lyle's hairpiece in a fit of rage, mocking her son's weakness in front of his father. She had been so corrupted by Jose's abuse that she began to project her hatred onto her own children. When a mother loses the capacity to love, she becomes the gatekeeper of hell. Kitty's frequency is that of someone who died inside long before the actual shotgun blast rang out. America once asked, why kill the mother too? She didn't abuse them. The answer lies in the moment Kitty walked into the living room that night. In the minds of Lyle and Erik, Kitty wasn't a mother needing protection. She was the accomplice who had abandoned them in the hands of a demon. The shot intended for Kitty didn't carry the frequency of fear like the one for Jose. It carried the frequency of resentment built up over 20 years. As Kitty tried to crawl away, Lyle returned to reload. He wanted to end that silence. He wanted to punish the woman who had watched him be destroyed without once reaching out to save him. It was a cruel act, but in the dark logic of abused children, it was the only way to uproot the nightmare. They didn't just kill their parents. They were destroying a system that had betrayed them. Kitty Menendez's death leaves a costly lesson about the responsibility of a guardian. In that mansion, wealth created a frequency of interference that drowned out the cries for help. Kitty took her secrets to the grave, but she left Lyle and Erik with a psychological burden they could never shed, the feeling of being rejected by their own mother. During the trial, photos of a glamorous Kitty and Kitty at the crime scene were placed side by side, creating a horrific contrast. Strange Frequency asks, if Kitty had spoken up 10 years earlier, would the 3 of them still be alive today? Chapter 7 closes in gloom as we realize that sometimes silence is just as bloody as a gunshot. We will witness how justice ensnared the brothers in the next chapter. The year is 1995. The fever of the first trial has cooled, but public animosity toward the brothers has surged following the O.J. Simpson verdict. The justice system is determined not to lose again. In this second trial, Judge Stanley Weisberg makes a decision that irrevocably seals the fate of Lyle and Erik. He bans almost all evidence regarding sexual abuse. The frequency of pain is silenced, replaced by the frequency of pure criminality. The jury is no longer allowed to hear about the horrific nights in the bedroom. They are only permitted to hear about the shotgun blasts and the Rolex watches. Lyle and Erik are no longer portrayed as broken children, but as calculating assassins. This is not a trial seeking the truth. It is a legal execution aimed at those who dared to challenge the social order of Beverly Hills. July 2nd, 1996. The final verdict echoes through the room. Life without the possibility of parole. No mercy, no second chances. But the true punishment does not lie in the sentence itself. It lies in how it is executed. The California prison system carries out an act of profound cruelty. They separate the brothers. Lyle is sent to Mule Creek State Prison. Erik is sent to Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility. Two human beings who walk through an earthly hell together are now cast into two separate black holes. The only frequency connecting them is severed. In the final moment they see each other in court. No words are spoken, only the gaze of two people who know they may never touch each other again. The world wants them to be utterly solitary in their guilt. 22 years. That is how long Lyle and Erik go without seeing each other's faces. In the frequency of the penitentiary, time does not flow, it stands still. They communicate through censored letters, through dreams of a past devoid of abuse. Erik becomes a mentor for young inmates, trying to atone for his mistakes by preventing violence. Lyle finds solace in tending to the prison gardens. They grow old behind stone walls, their hair graying and skin wrinkling, yet the memory of that night remains as vivid as yesterday. The public has forgotten them. Beverly Hills has found new scandals to whisper about. But in the darkness of isolation, Lyle and Erik remain the only frequency of resistance against oblivion. They survive not because they hope for freedom, but because they only have each other to believe they are still human. A life sentence is not just about the deprivation of liberty. It is about being forced to live forever in the worst moment of your life. Lyle once said, "We built our own prison long before the police arrived." This isolation is the final chapter of the Jose Menendez algorithm. He won even in death, for he succeeded in completely destroying his family. But Strange Frequency wants you to notice one thing. Despite being separated, despite the world turning its back on them, the frequency of the bond between the brothers never flickers out. It silently waits for a new generation, a new perspective to be decoded once again. Chapter 8 closes with the cold sound of an iron door locking. But in that darkness, a tiny spark from the future is beginning to ignite. We will witness the resurgence of the truth in the next chapter. 2 decades passed in silence until a new generation emerged, Generation Z. Unlike the public of 1993, who were blinded by the glare of wealth, today's youth view this case through the lens of trauma and mental health. On TikTok and across social media, the Menendez frequency began to hum once again. They didn't see 2 greedy assassins. They saw 2 children abandoned by the legal system. As viral clips of Erik's tearful testimony resurfaced, millions began to ask, why have we locked victims of abuse in prison for life? A revolution of perception ignited. The facts remained the same, but the world observing those facts had changed. At Strange Frequency, we call this the frequency of restorative justice. The Menendez case has become a symbol of the fight against domestic abuse in the digital age. But empathy is not enough. Justice requires proof. And then a legal bombshell emerged from the ashes of the past. A letter sent by Erik to his cousin, Andy Cano, written 8 months before the murders, was discovered. In that letter, Erik described his absolute terror regarding his father's abuse. This wasn't courtroom testimony meant to secure an acquittal. It was a cry for help from a past where Erik had no intention of picking up a gun. It is fossilized evidence proving that their pain was real, not a Hollywood act. The frequency of this letter shattered the logic of the original prosecution. It felt like a message sent through time to exonerate children who had been ignored by the world. The storm didn't stop there. Roy Roslow, a former member of the popular boy band Menudo, unexpectedly spoke out. He claimed that he too had been abused by Jose Menendez when he was a teenager. Roy's testimony served as the final piece of the puzzle, completing the portrait of a monster hiding behind the image of a successful businessman. Now, Jose was no longer just a father wrongfully murdered. He was revealed as a serial predator. Roy Rosilow's frequency connected with Lyle and Erik's, creating an unstoppable shockwave. The brothers' lawyers filed a petition to review the sentence. For the first time in 35 years, the prison doors no longer felt permanent. Hope, the most dangerous frequency of all, began to seep through the cold iron bars. And then a miracle occurred in 2018. After more than 2 decades of separation, The prison system allowed Lyle and Erik to be transferred to the same facility, the R.J. Donovan Correctional Facility. The moment they saw each other, no cameras were there to record it, but witnesses say they collapsed into each other's arms and sobbed for several minutes. Two middle-aged men carrying the scars of a lifetime of storms finally found each other's frequency again. They were no longer the Menendez brothers from the headlines. They were simply two brothers. Chapter 9 closes with the image of Lyle and Erik walking together in the prison yard. The California sky is as blue as it was that night in Beverly Hills, but this time, they are no longer alone. The frequency of truth has brought them together, preparing them for the final chapter of their lives. The battle for freedom. 2024, 2025, and now the present day. The frequency of the Menendez case has never vibrated as powerfully as it does now. With new evidence from Erik's letter and Roy Rossello's testimony, lawyers are striving for something that was unthinkable 30 years ago: overturning a life sentence. The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office stands under immense pressure from global public opinion. Does the justice system have the courage to admit they were wrong? To admit they punished the victims instead of protecting them? Behind closed doors, judges are weighing a new sentence, perhaps manslaughter. If that happens, Lyle and Erik could walk through those prison gates immediately. Freedom, a light whose shape they have long forgotten, is now just a signature away. But look at Lyle and Erik today. They are no longer the impulsive young men of Beverly Hills. They are men in their 50s, with graying hair and eyes etched deep with the marks of remorse and reflection. In over 30 years, they haven't just sat waiting to die. They have studied, they have married behind bars, and they have helped hundreds of other inmates find the path to redemption. If they were to walk out tomorrow, they would see a completely different world. A world without Jose, without Kitty, and without the hollow glamour of the 90s. Their frequency now is the frequency of reconciliation. They have paid with an entire lifetime of youth for 15 minutes of explosive hatred. Regardless of the court's verdict, they built a prison of conscience within themselves a long time ago. The Menendez brothers case is not just a crime story. It is a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of our society: domestic abuse, maternal indifference, and the failure of justice when blinded by wealth. Strange Frequency wants you to ask yourself, what is true justice? Is it locking someone in a dungeon forever, or giving them a chance to atone after suffering unimaginable pain? That night in Beverly Hills, no one won. Jose and Kitty lost their lives, Lyle and Erik lost their souls, and we lost our faith in the perfect family. This dark frequency reminds us that behind every glamorous door, there may be a cry for help being stifled. It is our responsibility to listen before the shotgun has a chance to fire. We are preparing to close the Menendez file. Lyle and Erik may be freed, or they may die in prison as their original sentence decreed. But one thing is certain: their story will forever be remembered as a wake-up call. Never ignore the frequency of pain, no matter how much diamond or fame conceals it. Thank you for joining Strange Frequency on this journey through the shadows of the Beverly Hills mansion. Subscribe to the channel to continue decoding the mystery frequencies of humanity. For now, look at your own home. Listen to the sounds around you and ask yourself, is there a frequency that needs your rescue? Goodbye, and always keep your own frequency at peace.